is the, there we go. Lesson from an outlaw biker. And particularly the one that passed. He had cancer. I'm not going to mention any names because the names aren't important here. What's important is what I'm about to share with you. The guy that passed, he died of cancer. So he struggled with that for a while. And he succumbed to it. He died from it. But after our message, several people, and we invited people to come up and speak if they wanted, if they felt they wanted to say anything. And as they came up, here's what they said. They said, you know, I was having some struggles. And John, I'm going to call him John. Sorry, Johns. It's just a very common name, but that's not who the guy was named. I'm just going to call him John, so I'm referencing somebody. So, talking about John, and they said, you know, I was in an accident a few months back, and I got a phone call from John, and he said, you're going to get through this, and I love you, brother. Next guy got up and he said, yeah, I was struggling, I was having some rough times, and John called me and said, you're going to get through this, and I love you, brother. And I was like, wow. And then someone in the back yelled out, that's what we're about. That's what we're about. Now, folks, we weren't in church. There were 500 to 700 outlaw bikers there. What they were about is probably what the church should be about. But what do they say about churches? We're stuck up, we're conceited, we're angry haters. They never say anything about love. Why is that? Are we missing something? Next slide. Oh, yeah, you already know that. Next, please. You will get through this. I love you, brother. Now, when John made that call to these guys, he wasn't active, able to get around. In fact, he couldn't even get out of bed. He couldn't even get out of bed. But he called his brother up and said, you're going to get through this. And I love you, brother. Do we do that? I'm not trying to make anybody feel guilty, because I'm guilty if we're going to do that. But do we do that? Next slide, please. Outlaws love, while Christians fight, bicker, and disagree. Don't we? In fact, this is a little crazy thing. There's several other Christian clubs around, and they've come to us on a couple occasions and said they want to do things together with Triple Tree because they want us to be unified. Unity's great. But here's the crazy thing about that. The guys who are coming to us and saying this, were once a part of Triple Tree. The reason we're not unified is because they left. We were unified. We were all one. And I bring that up just to say that's what we do as churches. We get offended. And we get divided. Because we're offended. Folks, if you can be offended, you will be. Guaranteed. If there's a possibility that you can be offended, you will be. And I'll probably be the one to do it. I'll just tell you right now. If you can be offended, you will be. Because Satan loves that stuff. He'll plant the seeds. He can't make you do anything, but he'll plant the seeds. Because he wants you offended. Because he doesn't want this to work. He doesn't want churches to work. He doesn't want ministries to work. He doesn't want Triple Tree to work. He wants to divide it any way he can. And sometimes it works. And if you look at all the churches, sometimes it works rather well. Because we forget what outlaw bikers know, what they live by. Now there are some problems there because they only love those who love them. And Jesus talked about that, didn't he? Mm-hmm. What good is it if we just love those who love us? Even the heathens do that. Was Jesus here? Of course he was. But yeah, the Bible is so relevant today. Even the heathens do that. And they do. Well, there you go. It is what an unbelieving world finds simply unbelievable. It's what an unbelieving world finds simply unbelievable that Christians can't get along. Now, actually, we don't have to get along, but we have to love each other. And that's not always easy because we get offended and then we fear. We get offended and then we fear. And the offense breaks things up and the fear keeps things apart. And then we're separated, then we're angry. Then people look at us and say, what? And they do notice. They know that, hey, you used to be there. You used to do that, and now you don't go there anymore. What happened? Oh, well, I wasn't being fed. Really? Well, did you eat when you were there? I mean, you could go to Shady Maple and have the big buffet and not be fed because you got to eat. That's right? You got to do something there.
That's right.
Or you're not going to get fed. Okay. It's what an unbelieving world finds simply unbelievable. Next slide, please. Let's take a look at Matthew 5, 43 through 47. You've heard the law that says, love your neighbor and hate your enemy. But I say, love your enemies. So this isn't man's law. This is God's law. Love your enemies. Pray for those who persecute you. In that way, you will be acting as true children of your Father in heaven. For he gives his sunlight to both the evil and the good. Now, just so we know here in the beginning when it says, you've heard it say, that the law says love your neighbor, because the Pharisees had a bunch of laws that they put together and created. And those laws were to prevent you from breaking the commands, the other law, the main commandments. So they kept piling up laws on top of laws on top of laws on top of laws until they had so many laws, they didn't even know what laws they had. So when you hear things like that, that's what it's referring to. You've heard it, the law says, love your neighbor and hate your enemy. But I say, love your enemies, pray for those who persecute you. In that way, pray for those who persecute you. Wow. Pray for those who persecute you. That's not just a little disagreement, folks. That's someone coming after you. You say that's not practical, that's not real. Really? Shall I remind you of David? He was being pursued by King Saul. For what reason, you ask? Oh, to be killed. Saul wanted David dead because Saul had heard that David was going to be the next king. Saul wanted David dead. And he made it perfectly clear that he wanted David dead. So David knew that Saul wanted him dead. So David avoided him. Makes sense? David was presented an opportunity when Saul was asleep from chasing David, made him tired. He laid down, fell asleep. David went into the camp with his men that he had with him, and there was Saul lying on the ground. Now David was armed with a spear. There was Saul laying on the ground, sound asleep. David could have taken the sword and threw it right through him, killed him, done. Would have been easy. In fact, the men that were with him encouraged him to do it. But he didn't do it. He did not do it. He walked away. He walked away. Pray for those who persecute you. In that way, you will be acting as true children of your Father in heaven, for He gives His sunlight to both the evil and the good. And He sends rain. Next slide, please. On the just and the unjust alike. If you love only those who love you, what reward is there in that? Even corrupt tax collectors do that much. And so, you know, tax collectors in that day were like the evilest of evil. They robbed from people who didn't have and robbed from people who did have through tax collecting. So they were considered very corrupt, even below sinners, if you will. There were sinners and then there were tax collectors. If you are kind only to your friends, how are you different from anyone else? Even the pagans do that. Even the pagans do that. Next slide, please. Luke 6, 27 through 35. But to you who are willing to listen, and when it says listen here, it means for those who are willing to adhere to. So it's not just hear, but adhere to. In the Greek, it means to adhere to grab on to make part of your life. But to you who are willing to listen, I say, love your enemies. Do good to those who hate you. Bless those who curse you. Pray for those who hurt you. If anyone slaps you on the cheek, offer the other cheek also. If someone demands your coat, offer your shirt also. See, I'm not making this stuff up. Next slide, please. Give to anyone who asks, and when things are taken away from you, don't try to get them back. Do to others as you would like them to do to you. If you love only those who love you, why should you get credit for that? Even sinners love those who love them. And if you do good only to those who do good to you, why should you get credit? Even sinners do that much. And if you lend money only to those who can repay you, why should you get credit? Even sinners will lend to other sinners for a full return. Love your enemies, do good to them. Lend to them without expecting to be repaid. Lend to them without expecting to be repaid, then your reward from heaven will be very great. And you will truly be acting as children of the Most High, for He is kind to those who are unthankful and wicked. Wow. You must be compassionate, just as your Father is compassionate. Now, I left out something in that story before to prove a point, but I will come clean now. The gentleman who died and who passed, he'd been talking to and working with Triple Tree for several months, several years. So he knew Christ. So he's in heaven today. I bring that up only to say. So you're going to say, well, okay then. That's why he loved people, right? Well, he was still in their world. He was still in their world. And doing things that Christians don't do in our world. You must be compassionate, just as your Father is compassionate. Next slide. This is a quote from someone you might recognize. Yeah, Billy Graham. He said this. He said, the greatest need in the world is a transformation of human nature. We need a new heart that will not have lust and greed and hate in it. We need a heart filled with love, peace, and joy. And that is why Jesus came into the world. Because we need a new heart. We need a new heart. And only when we have the new heart can we find the new life. Next slide, please. Matthew 22, 36 through 40. It says this. Teacher, which is the greatest commandment in the law? Well, this ought to be good. We're asking Jesus what the greatest commandment in the law is. Now, of course, they were trying to trap Jesus when they said this. Here's what Jesus said. Love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, with all your mind. This is the first and greatest commandment. Funny that the first and greatest commandment is love, right? Love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, and with all your mind. This is the first and greatest commandment. And the second is like it. Love your neighbor as yourself. Now, of course, if you're a Pharisee or you're thinking like them, the first thing you're going to say is, okay, who's my neighbor? Let's narrow this down. Who's my neighbor? Okay, this neighbor and that neighbor. Okay, good. But the statement, what Jesus was saying is, neighbor is everybody around you. Everybody you see. Everybody you come in contact with. Uh-oh. Now it's getting dicey. Everybody you see. Everybody you come in contact with. Everybody you interact with. Love them like you love yourself. And the second is like it. Love your neighbor as yourself. And if you do those two things, verse 40, if you do those two, that's it, not 10 but 2. If you do those two, all the law and prophets hang on those two commandments. You do them, the rest will fall in line. Next slide, please. Love. Love. That is what we should be known for. Christians should be known for our love. We should love people better than anybody because we know of God's love for us. And not everybody knows that. Not everybody's felt that. Not everybody's believes that, unfortunately. The Outlaws sure don't. They don't come to church. Why? It's what an unbelieving world finds unbelievable, because we bicker and fight and separate and can't get along. We get offended. And the thing is, when we get offended, we don't work through the offense. We leave. Like, oh, I'm not going back there. Not getting fed. Not going back there. I'm not saying you should never leave a church. Don't get me wrong. If you're in a church that's not following the Scriptures, not following what thus saith the Lord, you get out and get out fast. But so many times, in so many places, that's not the reason. It's because we get offended. We got offended. Can you believe what so-and-so did? Wow! Actually, yes, I can. I might have done it myself, depending on what it is. Yeah, I kind of do believe that. Well, what are you going to do about it? I'm not coming back. Well, if you're not coming back, then I don't have to do anything about it, do I? Where's the love in our churches today? And I'm not talking about us, folks. Maybe I am, but I'm not intentionally talking about anyone here. I'm talking about the church, the Christian church, and the view that the world has of Christians and Christianity today. It's got a bad image. It's got a bad rap. Some of it is justified. But doggone it, what people need to see when they see us is right there. If that's all you get from today, you got it. It's right there. That's what Christians, that's what people need to see when they see us. Because that's what Christ has done for us. Next slide, please. So how do we love? I could have ended on that previous slide. I didn't. So how do we love? How do we do it? Next slide. Guess what? It's in the Bible. The answer. Yeah, it is. Romans 12, 9 through 21. Love must be sincere. You must hate what is evil. Cling to what is good. Hate what is evil. Cling to what is good. Be devoted to one another in love. Honor one another above yourselves. Honor one another above yourselves. Never be lacking in zeal, but keep your spiritual fervor serving the Lord. Be joyful. Whoa. Be joyful? But I'm not being fed. How can I be joyful? Be joyful in hope. Patient in affliction. Uh-oh. Patient in affliction, yeah. So when things do go wrong, we don't get to leave. Patient in affliction. We're supposed to be patient. I'm taking my marbles and I'm going home. That's not patient. Patient in affliction. Faithful in prayer. And share with the Lord's people who are in need. Practice hospitality. Practice hospitality. Not just do it, practice it too. Why? Guess what happens when you practice something?
You get good at it.
You get good at it. You better believe it. You get good at it. You get good at it. Practice hospitality. You'll get good at it. Next slide. Bless those who persecute you. Bless those who persecute you. You come upon Saul, and you've got a spear in your hand, and he's trying to kill you. Don't drive it through his head. Don't do it. Revenge is whose?
The Lord's.
Revenge is mine, saith the Lord. He's got this. He'll take care of this. Bless those who persecute you. Bless and do not curse. Rejoice with those who rejoice. Mourn with those who mourn. Live in harmony with one another. Live in harmony with one another. Now, that does not mean you're not going to be offended. See, so many times we think, oh, well, I'm offended. This mustn't be for me. Wrong. You're going to be offended. But live in harmony as it is with you. The things you can control. Live in harmony with one another. Do not be proud, but be willing to associate with people of low position. Do not be conceited. Do not repay anyone evil for evil. Be careful to do what is right in the eyes of everyone, if it is possible. As far as it depends on you, live at peace with some people. Live at peace with the ones I like. Live at peace with everyone. As far as it depends on me. Right? I mean, you can't control other people. You can't control the world. But as far as it depends on you, live at peace with everyone. Next slide, please. 19, verse 19. Do not take revenge, my dear friends, but leave room for God's wrath. For it is written, it is mine to avenge, I will repay, says the Lord. On the contrary, if your enemy is hungry, feed him. What? If your enemy is hungry, feed him. We struggle to do that for our brothers and sisters. If our enemy is hungry, if Saul's hungry, feed him. Don't stab him with your sword. If he's thirsty, give him something to drink. In doing this, you will heap burning coals on his head. Do not be overcome by evil, but overcome evil. Overcome evil. Next slide, please. John 13, 33, 35. This is Jesus speaking. Let me frame this a little bit. So, the situation where Jesus is right now, it's the end of his ministry. He's with his disciples. And he's talking with them. This is hours before he's going to be arrested and killed. Dear children, I will be with you only a little longer. And as I told the Jewish leaders, you will search for me, but you cannot come where I am going. So now I am giving you a new commandment. Okay, so Jesus is giving the disciples a new commandment. Now they've been with him, right? The 12. They've been with him through his entire ministry. They've heard Jesus talk about love all the time. It's what he did. It's what he was. It's what he's about. So now I'm giving you a new commandment. Could you see the disciples on the edge of their seats? A new one. Here it comes. Everybody get your pens and papers out. Writing this down. A new commandment I give you. And here's what Jesus said. So now I give you a new commandment. Love each other. What? Jesus, you've been telling us this for 3 years. Love each other. Love each other. Of course. Love each other, but he doesn't end there, does he? Love each other just as I have loved you. Just as I have loved you. And then he died for him. And then he died for him. And then he died for you. And me. That's what he did. Just as I have loved you, you should love each other. Your love for one another will prove to the world that you are my disciples. It will prove to the world that we are Christians. Should prove to the world that we are Christians. You know what it doesn't say there? It doesn't say that if I get upset, that's going to prove to the world that I'm a Christian. It doesn't say if I stomp out of the church or start my own church, that's going to prove to other people that I'm a Christian. It doesn't say that if I hate my neighbor, that that's going to prove to other people that I'm a Christian. Does it? Your love for one another will prove to the world that you are my disciples. So why doesn't the world know? Why doesn't the world know? What are we missing? Love. Love. Next slide. The disciples started to get it after Jesus rose from the dead. See, prior to that, the disciples were kind of cowardly, afraid. In fact, when Jesus was arrested, what did the disciples do? Anybody? What did the disciples do? They ran. They took off. Jesus was being arrested. They took off. They were not the sturdiest bunch of men at that point. But something happened. Something changed those men. Not just a little change. These were cowards, folks. They were afraid of everything. If you said boom, they would run. But something changed them. Those 12 started forming groups that were called ecclesias. They're small Christian communities, if you will, that worship together. The Roman Empire falls, Christians become mainstreams. Pharisees rules because they stuck with their policies and programs versus what Jesus did. It changed those men that were with him. They became the boldest of bold. They became so bold, they were willing to suffer and die for Jesus. Not only did they say it, they did. Every one of them suffered, brutally suffered, and died for Jesus. Put their lives on the line. What changed? What made them do it? What would make that kind of change? It had to be something significant. And it was. They saw Jesus. See, they saw him die. They saw him on the cross. But that didn't make them bold. That made them fearful. Their entire world just got turned upside down. They had no idea what was coming next. Was Jesus' ministry over? They saw him die. But then they saw him again. Alive. Thomas put his fingers in Jesus' palms where the nails had scarred them. They saw him alive, and that changed everything. Jesus is alive! And that changed everything for these men. Has it changed it for you? Next slide, please.
There we go.
It's easy to love that.
Is that all going to be said?
That is so easy to love.
Had a kitty cat.
Next slide, please.
I want one. I want one.
Oh.
But that's not! That's pretty hard to love.
Look, Daddy, I was
Right
born.
there. Yeah,
You left the trash out.
that's harder to love, right? Life gets messy. I mean, it's easy to love when everything's going great and everyone's hugging us and shaking our hands. Like, I love everybody! And then things get messy. And then that happens. And it gets hard. And then we get offended. And then we find another church. Or we start our own, better yet, right?
Okay, go again.
Okay. Yeah. Yeah. We get offended, and better watch out when we get offended, because whatever we said before, that's out the window. Yeah, love. Yeah, right. We get offended, and then we get even, and that feels good. For such a short time. And then we're in trouble. Next screen, please. You heard that love is a verb, but why at times is it so hard to do? It's probably because love's not really a verb, or it is a verb, but it's also a noun. See, love doesn't start there. Love doesn't start in what we do. What we do has to be a product of love. What's in here? That's where it starts. That's where it comes from. Our love starts here as a noun in our hearts, becomes a verb by what we do. And that's what everybody sees. See, they're watching us. Many people don't realize that, but you put that fish on the back of your car, and then you go 90 miles down the highway, sweeping in and out of cars and everything, and people, what? Now, I'm not criticizing. I'm just saying. Non-Christians are watching us. They're watching what we do. They're watching. They're watching our behavior. And sometimes they're just shaking their head. Like, really? That's what Christians are about? I want no part of it. Now, folks, we are not perfect. We'll never be perfect.
That's right.
And when we're perfect, we're not going to be here. I'm not saying we need to be perfect. No. In fact, I'm the example of imperfection. We don't have to be perfect. But we have to love. In our imperfection, we have to love. And so many times, in our imperfection, in our anger, in our being upset. See, Satan wants us to be angry and upset. Why? Because what aren't we doing when we're angry and when we're upset? We're not praying. We're not loving other people. We're so stuck on ourselves at those moments. I mean, it's all about us. It's all about getting revenge or whatever it is that's angering us. I'm taking care of that right now. But we're not loving. Satan doesn't want us to love. Because that's dangerous for him. If we're loving people. We don't have to be perfect, but just love. People. All people. Enemies. Not just those who love you. Next slide, please. 1 John 4:7-21. Loving one another. Dear friends, just proving, this is all over the Bible, the Word of God. Love, love, love. And what's the first thing Christians don't do or forget to do? It's love. Dear friends, let us continue to love one another, for love comes from God. Love comes from God. It's not from us. It's not something we can do. It's not something we can achieve on our own. It's something that God can and will do through us if we let Him. Next slide, please. Anyone who loves is a child of God and knows God. But anyone who does not love does not know God, for God is love. God showed how much He loved us by sending His one and only Son into the world so that we might have eternal life through Him. Real love. This is real love. Not that we loved God, but that He loved us. And He sent His Son as a sacrifice to take away our sins. And nobody who was around Him at the time got that. Dear friends, since God loved us that much, we surely ought to love each other. No one has ever seen God, but if we love each other, God lives in us. And His love is brought to full expression in us. Next slide, please. And God has given us His Spirit as proof that we live in Him and He in us. Furthermore, we have seen with our own eyes and now testify that the Father sent His Son to be the Savior of the world. All who declare that Jesus is the Son of God have God living in them, and they live in God. Next slide. We know how much God loves us, and we have put our trust in His love. God is love. And all who live in love live in God, and God lives in them. And as we live in God, our love grows more perfect. So we will not be afraid. We will not be afraid on the day of judgment, but we can face Him with confidence because we live like Jesus here in this world. Such love has no fear, because perfect love expels all fear. If we are afraid, it is for fear of punishment. And this shows that we have not fully experienced His perfect love. We love each other because He loved us first. Next slide. If someone says, I love God, but hates his fellow believer, that person is a liar. If we don't love people we can see, how can we love God whom we cannot see? And He has given us this command. Those who love God must also love their fellow believers. Must. Must. Not maybe. Not some of them. Not the ones you like. God must, well, those who love God must also love their fellow believers. Uh-oh. Next slide, please. This is love. Not that we loved God, but that He loved us, and He sent His Son as an atoning sacrifice for our sins. Next slide, please. Dear friends, let us continue to love one another, for love comes from God. Anyone who loves is a child of God and knows God, but anyone who does not know God. Anyone who does not love does not know God, for God is love. That's 1 John 4:7. Dear friends, let us continue to love one another, for love comes from God. Anyone who loves is a child of God. I just repeated myself. For God is love. Next slide, please. And the next. Now we stuck in a loop. Keep going. Such love has no fear, because perfect love expels all fear. If we are afraid, it is for fear of punishment, and this shows that we have not fully experienced His perfect love. One more. Next slide. There's no fear in love. None. In fact, fear will stop us from expressing love. Next slide. Matthew 14:22 through 27. Immediately after this, Jesus insisted that His disciples go back to the... Let me preface this. Jesus is with His disciples. They're getting into... He was preaching, and then they were getting into a boat because there's such a large crowd, and they were going to push off to go across the lake. And they did that. So you know what happens next. But Jesus was with them in the boat. So Jesus had been performing miracles. They knew who Jesus was. He was with them in the boat. So immediately after this, Jesus insisted that His disciples get back into the boat and cross to the other side of the lake. And by the way, yes, Jesus knew what was happening next. He knew. After sending them home, He went up into the hills by Himself to pray. So after sending them out. Night fell while He was there, and meanwhile the disciples were in trouble in a faraway land, for a strong wind had risen, and they were fighting heavy waves. About 3 o'clock in the morning, Jesus came toward them. This is what I was thinking. Okay. Jesus came toward them walking on water, and when the disciples saw Him walking on the water, they were terrified in their fear, and they cried out that it's a ghost. Next slide. But Jesus spoke to them and said, "Don't be afraid." He said, "Take courage. I am here. Don't be afraid." The verse I was thinking of, which I also had in the previous sermon that I had done was when they were in the boat and the storm was about to overcome them, and they were again terrified of the storm. And Jesus was right there in the boat with them, and of course, He wakes up, calms the storm, and says, "What? Oh, you of little faith? Why were you so afraid? Don't be afraid. Take courage. I am here." Next slide. What Jesus was trying to say is, don't be afraid, even if there's something to be afraid of. There was a ghost. There was high winds. You could die. Yes, you could. Don't be afraid, even when there's something to be afraid of. Why was Jesus so concerned about fear? Why didn't He want us to be afraid? Being afraid is pretty darn natural.
There's Jesus put there.
Why didn't He want us to be afraid?
Because we're not trusting in Him.
We're not trusting in Him, and being fearful. What do we do when we're fearful? We forget about
Love.
Everybody
No
else.
fear of
Yeah.
perfect love.
we forget about everybody else.
Hallelujah.
We're consumed in fear. We're fearful. So what about the guy down the street? There's a guy down the street. I've got an issue here. We forget about love because we're afraid. Do not be afraid, even when there's something to fear. So don't be afraid when there's nothing to be afraid of, but don't be afraid when there is something to be afraid of. Next slide, please. But they still didn't get it, and then they did. This going back to the disciples. They did not understand what Jesus was trying to tell them, and they didn't get it until He died, rose again, and they saw Him go. We get it. Jesus is more powerful than the grave. Jesus is more powerful than anything I could possibly be angry at. Jesus is more powerful. They got it. They died for Him after that. Next slide. When Jesus was arrested, the disciples scattered in fear. Jesus was crucified, died, and was placed in a tomb, and then on the third day, He rose from the dead. Next slide. And that changed everything. Jesus defeated death, and his disciples finally got it. Next slide. But I don't have enough faith. But I'm a sinner, says everybody. But I don't know what to say. But what if I fail? And what if you do? And it all prevents us from loving unless we just shove this stuff aside. Don't worry about having enough faith. You know, there are some Christians that spend their time constantly working to increase their faith, which is a good thing. But they get so consumed in the knowledge and trying to attain it that they forget about everything else around them. They forget to love their brother. They forget they have a brother. When their brother's having a struggle, they forget to pick up the phone and say, you're going to get through this. And I love you, brother. And I love you, sister. Who said that? Next slide. Fear is a prison. Love is the exit. Fear is a prison. Love is the exit. And Jesus is love. Next slide, please. 1 Corinthians 13. This is my last set of verses, but what a powerful set of verses this is. They refer to 1 Corinthians 13 as what? The love chapter. Funny I should end with that. If I speak in tongues of men or of angels, but do not have love, I am only a resounding gong or a clanging cymbal. If I have the gift of prophecy and can fathom all mysteries and all knowledge, and if I have faith, it can move mountains. If I have faith that can move mountains, but do not have love, I have nothing. If I give all I possess to the poor, and give over my body to hardship that I may boast, but do not have love, I gain nothing. Love is patient. Love is kind. It does not envy. It does not boast. It is not proud. There's a lot of sermons wrapped up in there, isn't there?
Amen.
It does not dishonor others. It is not self-seeking. It is not easily angered. It keeps no record of wrongs. Love does not delight in evil, but rejoices with the truth. It always protects, always trusts, always hopes, always perseveres. Love never fails. But where there are prophecies, they will cease. Where there are tongues, they will be still. Where there is knowledge, it will pass away. For we know in part and we prophesy in part. But when completeness comes, what is in part vanishes, disappears. When I was a child, I talked like a child, I thought like a child, I reasoned like a child. When I became a man, I put the ways of childhood behind me. For now we see only a reflection as in a mirror. Then we shall see face to face. Now I know in part. Then I shall know fully, even as I am fully known. And now these three things remain. Now, when it says that, another version could say, and now these things are the most important. And now these things are the most important. Faith, hope, and love. Faith, hope, and love. But the greatest of these, faith, hope, and love, the greatest of these is love. The greatest of these is love. Christians should be known for their love instead of being known for everything else we're known for. Big churches, bickering, not getting along, infighting, outfighting, breaking off with one group, starting another group, starting your own group because you don't like them, or it's what an unbelieving world finds simply unbelievable. Because we're not known for love. But guess who's trying to take that moniker? Outlaw bikers. Really? Yeah. They love each other. Yeah, they're a little screwed up. As are we. But they love each other. Now the Bible tells us they're going to love each other. Even the heathens do that. So our love has to be bigger than that. We have to love those who don't love us. We have to love those who persecute us. We have to love those who are trying to take me out. I gotta love them. I've got to love them. I can't drive a spear in his head, even though I've got a spear in my hand and he's asleep in front of me. Can't do it. And when they see that, when the world sees that, and they will, because they're watching us, they're watching our behavior. Next door neighbor is watching our behavior, wants to find out what we believe is the truth or a lie. And they mark it down in their little books. That guy's not right. This guy's not right. Where's the love? They don't have it. We have it. We don't have it, but we know it. We need to have it. This is so important, folks. We need to have it. Love. We know it. We need to share it with people that we don't know, with people who are our enemies and who are trying to take us out. Revenge is the Lord's. Ours is to love, because He loved us and died for our sins. But the greatest of these is love. So here's the takeaway from today. When you know somebody's hurting, pick up the phone, give them a call, and say this: you're going to get through this. And I love you, brother. Hang up the phone. And they'll talk about you at your funeral. They will. I've seen it happen. Amen.
Amen.